Hello everyone, I'm Jack Fisher and welcome to my world. And thus far, I've tried to keep that world as politically balanced as possible. I won't go so far as to say my channel has been completely apolitical. If you've been following me from the beginning, you can probably surmise my leanings on certain topics or issues. But in general, I don't engage in any deep, substantive debates. I save that for people who are smarter, more informed, and more qualified than me. Yes, I have made some videos with political overtones. I just prefer that those videos remain rare, relevant, and appropriate. But recently, I have noticed something. Whenever there's a major geopolitical event or controversy, certain videos of mine get a spike in views. I won't say which ones, I'll just say, I understand why they're relevant. I don't know for sure if this video will be similar in that regard. I just hope that the perspective I'm about to share holds up down the line. Because for as long as I've been old enough to vote, I've noticed something about political and social movements. For the most part, people want change. Specifically, they want change in the mold of reform, refinement, and improvement. Whether it's in a political framework or a social structure, change of some form is often at the heart of every effort. While it is true that there are those who don't want anything to change, they tend to be in the minority. Like it or not, the world is always changing. People, cultures, and society are always changing. Trying to fight it or reverse it is like shoveling sand against the tide. It's a losing effort. Much of the conflict among certain groups stems from the pace and nature of that change. Whether you identify as conservative or liberal, moderate or reactionary, fascist or communist, the change you seek is part of a particular vision or endgame. It may be impossible to get to the endgame, but the vision and the effort to pursue it, that is the catalyst from which people, cultures, and politics evolve. And a great deal of conflict comes from people and groups having conflicting visions. And that conflict can get very intense. Some nations manage those conflicts better than others, but any nation that fails to manage it well to a certain point, they tend not to last. Now, that's a very basic overview of change in the socio-political structures around it. Not presenting it as though I'm an expert in the field. I'm just keeping things simple, because it'll help make sense of all the discourse surrounding major issues, be they political or social. Having established this big picture context regarding change, I'd like to offer this particular insight with respect to the politics of change in general. And it boils down to this. Governments and societies will only change when it's convenient, profitable, or forced. On the surface, this may seem like a broad generalization. Most people could probably come to this same conclusion with a little study, observation, and some common sense. But I encourage everyone to dig a little deeper. Because if you break down major social conflicts, be it past or present, this should help make sense of it in a new way. Take something as general as civil rights. That may mean different things to different people, but it is a recurring theme that stems directly from humanity's tribal nature. We're all inclined to form groups and link our identities to that group. It doesn't matter if the distinctions are among race, gender, ethnicity, religion, culture, or language. The concept of civil rights is to ensure that certain groups are treated fairly and equally. But you don't need to look too far to find examples of gross inequalities and egregious injustices. Some are a lot more socially relevant than others, but so long as there are imperfect people living within imperfect societies, there will always be disparities with respect to civil rights. The first step is simply being aware of those imperfections. Historically, that wasn't easy. In highly stratified societies, these imperfections weren't even acknowledged as imperfections. That was just their sense of normal. But thanks to mass communication, mass literacy, and greater interactions among people, it's a lot easier to become aware of these issues. And people with a general capacity for empathy will identify the injustices. So, we now have a problem. We understand the need to fix the problem. For that, we need some form of change. So how do we go about that? And why might there be resistance? Ideally, the only resistance would be one of logistics. But we don't live in an ideal world. And there's never been an ideal system, be it a government, a society, or the institutions within. They've always been flawed to varying degrees. But despite this, change does happen. Change needs to happen. Stagnation, regardless of whether it's sought, preferred, or imposed, that always fails in the long run. As for how change happens and why it happens, this is where those three factors I mentioned earlier come into play. Sticking to civil rights, you can see those factors at work during the 1950s and 60s in the American South. For both the societies and local governments in this region, segregation by race wasn't just normal, it was a heavily entrenched institution. Changing it would not be at all convenient for those in charge, nor would it be profitable, given the attitudes of many people living in these areas. And efforts to force that change were met with major resistance. But ultimately, the change did happen. Attitudes about race relations began changing, and not by force either. Awareness of the treatments of Black Americans in these segregated systems also increased, thanks to protests, mass media, and social movements. It did not happen overnight, but it did get to a point where maintaining the status quo of segregation became inconvenient, unpopular, and bad for business. There were a lot of other forces behind these trends. Not all of them were related either, but they had a cumulative effect. Segregating large swaths of people might have been tenable for those in power, even if it was inconvenient. But when it starts generating bad publicity, then that's bad for business. And typically, once people begin feeling negative effects in their bank accounts, change becomes almost unavoidable. And those who still resisted invited force from the federal government. Even if, in hindsight, ending segregation was the right and just thing to do, some people were never going to accept that change. They had to be forced to do the right thing. And it's that last element where more conflict and complications tend to emerge. From the outside, it may seem outrageous, needing the force of the public or the state to do the right thing. You could easily reason how convenient it would be, but this ignores a key dynamic that tends to further obscure how change is pursued. And it usually comes down to this. Those who have the most wealth and power in any society will always undermine change that doesn't benefit them. Now, that might sound like a mix of heavy cynicism and conspiratorial thinking, but there's no need for some elaborate narrative. What I just outlined doesn't need any kind of central planning. It just tends to manifest as those at the top of any hierarchy pursue their interests. They don't formally meet in secretive lairs like a team of supervillains, and they don't hatch these bold plans for world domination. Because in the grand scheme of things, they really don't have to. The fact that they all just want more power and wealth ensures they'll be loosely aligned in some way. Granted, those allegiances are messy and frail, sometimes to the point of leading to large-scale wars, but the forces in play are fairly similar. They resist change that doesn't serve them, and they'll pursue the change that does, often with reckless abandon. It's just natural, if not inevitable, that the change that serves the powerful and wealthy tends to come at the cost of everyone else. And that's not an issue exclusive to the modern day. Within every society of every civilization, there are always people at the top. Their values, beliefs, and goals may vary, but the need to stay at the top and or elevate their position even more, that's a constant on par with human nature. Successful societies create systems and institutions that manage that nature. They also work if and when capable people with good values are in these positions. Not everyone at the top of any hierarchy is a tyrant, a demagogue, or a sociopath, but unfortunately, that domain does tend to attract individuals with those traits, if only because it affords them the change they seek for their own personal benefit. Those same individuals will also be far more reluctant to change, because if it doesn't benefit them in any way, why would they bother? With all these complex dynamics at work, from small communities to entire nations, it should be a bit easier to understand why good, necessary changes are so difficult. And even if they do happen, the pace of that change can be slow to the point of frustration. By and large, governments and society try to maintain a sense of balance. They'll permit, approve, or encourage certain changes as long as it doesn't cost or inconvenience them beyond a certain point. For some issues, like public services or welfare programs, the long-term benefits may outweigh the short-term costs. But other issues, especially hot-button social issues, that tends to follow evolving public attitudes and sentiments. If enough people within a population favor LGBTQ rights, then it's just more convenient and prudent to allow that change. And so long as it's not overly costly, it's often allowed to happen, to a certain point. However, it is possible for the same people at the top of a hierarchy to shape trends and attitudes. Authoritarian regimes have done it for centuries. They can, and often do, invest heavily in making the public feel a certain way. Doesn't matter if it's valid, ethical, or even logical. Get enough people in a community to feel a certain way, then those in positions of power have all the leverage they need to pursue even more power. And those with great wealth will have an avenue for influencing those in power, which can in turn aid in supplementing their wealth. And if you look at how the wealthy and powerful conduct themselves today, it may seem hopelessly corrupt. It's even worse in authoritarian countries where the powerful and the wealthy are often one and the same. It can get so concentrated into a select few individuals that it seems there's no mechanism for change beyond what these individuals allow. But therein lies the last and least obvious dynamic of change. Because once you get to change that requires force, that's almost always a last resort. It also tends to be a sign that the balance I mentioned earlier has been disrupted. If society and governments aren't changing in a way that the vast majority of the people find tenable, then force is going to enter the equation. It may begin with small, localized protests, but it can escalate into full-blown war. Going back to civil rights in the American South, that's what happened in the mid-1800s when slavery became untenable. One group, particularly the Southern aristocracy, wanted to continue slavery. It was just too profitable and too inconvenient to change. There was no way that kind of power and wealth was ever going to be given up voluntarily. Eventually, force was necessary to enact this change. And the aftermath of this change, as well as efforts to resist it, that is still an issue in many parts of America to this day. Go further back in history, from ancient civilizations to medieval societies, and a similar story tends to play out. The circumstances and catalysts vary wildly. But with regards to change, the patterns are there. Whenever change is necessary, whenever change is demanded, and those in charge cannot deliver for whatever reason, force will enter the picture. That can result in extended periods of civil unrest. It can even get so bad that kings, leaders, and rulers are outright killed by the people they once lorded over. That's a possibility that rarely crosses the minds of those in power. The very nature of that power ensures they become detached from the vast populace around them. If they're responsible with their power, allowing, managing, and resisting certain changes over time, that's not too great an issue. But if life ever becomes too difficult for too many people, then change by peaceful legal means becomes next to impossible. And ultimately, they'll have to resort to force. Because what the people lack in power and wealth, they more than make up for with numbers. History has shown time and again that the rich and powerful can only do so much to insulate themselves. They may not want change, they may not want to expend the time, energy, or money to implement it, but not doing so can cost them dearly, and not just in terms of money. Now, having laid all this out, having shared this perspective, I'm not going to make a judgment on where society is today. As an American, I've seen a lot of change over the course of my life. Some good, some bad, and plenty of things in between. But I'm also seeing signs that those in power aren't managing certain change in ways that reflects the desires of most Americans. It's not yet at a point where force on a large scale is necessary. But depending on how certain trends and political forces play out, it's certainly possible. Only time will tell, and the only true constant at any point is the never-ending need for change. And in the words of former President John F. Kennedy, those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thanks for joining me in my world. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and until next time, take care and stay safe.